When we study the literature of any ancient society or culture, the most earliest form of literature that we come across is the myths and legends. These kind of literature are usually not in writing but have been passed on from generation to generation and has been of a very primitive origin. And this kind of literature of remote antiquity mostly concern the origin and evolution of earth. Hinduism has this kind of literature which concerns about origin and evolution of earth, evolution of world. Christianity has such kind of religion which concern the origin and evolution of world. Similarly, the ancient literature of Chinese also has stories which concern or relates itself to the origin and evolution of world. The literature of remote antiquity or the literature that concerned itself with the origin and evolution of world can be classified into three stages in Chinese literature of remote antiquity. The first being the origin of the world, second being humans' quest or fight against the nature, and the final being a, a consistent try or fight for a good life. In the first phase, which concern itself with the origin and evolution of Earth, there are two stories that we find. Pangu creates or divides sky from the earth, and Nuwa mends heaven. These two myths or legends tell us about the origin of the world. Next, we move on to humans' consistent attempt against the nature, working with the nature, fighting against the nature. So there are again two stories which concern itself about man's quest or or a fight with the nature. This is Hou Yi Shoots down sun, and the other story is Jingwei, determined to fill up the sea. These two stories reflect man's regular striving against the nature to building or sustaining the world. In the process of striving against the nature, sacrifices have to be made. So another important story is Kun and Yu harness flood. This is a story which reflects self-sacrifice or people sacrificing themselves to build a better society. And finally, a, a desire in humans to live a better life, consistently improving their life. Chang flies to the moon. Chang is the goddess of moon in Chinese mythology, and this story reflects humans' regular endeavor to have an even better or an improved life. So these stories mainly comprise the literature of remote antiquity in China.
The legend of Pangu. Long, long ago, not in a land before the time, but a time before the land, there was nothing in the universe except an enormous egg shaped entity. Inside the egg, the opposite forces of yin and yang were all scrambled. It was a complete mess. But over time, the interaction between various substances and energies eventually conceived a being, a shaggy, horned giant named Pangu. For 18,000 years, Pangu slept and grew. One day he suddenly awoke. He opened his eyes but saw only pitch blackness. He strained his ears but heard only unnerving silence. Pangu found his dreary surroundings highly disturbing. Flustered, Fanku conjured a magical axe and landed upon the egg a mighty chop. The egg split into two with a thunderous crack. Slowly, yin and yang began to separate. Everything dark and heavy sank down to form the earth, and the rest, light and clear, drifted up to form the heavens. But Fan Ku was anxious that the halves would close up again, and so he stood between two halves to keep them apart. With each passing day, the sky rose 2 feet to 10 feet further above him. The earth thickened 10 feet below him, and Panku himself grew 10 feet. just to keep up with the growing expanse and hold on. It was a lonely and strenuous job. This toil the Concetus giant endured for another 6,570,000 days, or another 18,000 years, until he was certain that the realms were finally stabilized. Then, with a great crash, Pangu lay down and died. As the weary Pangu collapsed, a miraculous transformation took place. His final breath turned into winds and clouds, his voice into rumbling thunder. His left eye blazed into the sun, and right eye gleamed into the moon. His hair and beard became stars of the Milky Way. His limbs and hands and feet transformed into great mountains, and the blood running through his veins into flowing rivers. His flesh converted into fertile farmlands. His bones turned to precious gems and minerals. His teeth and nails become lustrous metals. The hairs on his skin burgeoned into lush vegetation, and the sweat from his extended labors fell as rainwater for the mortal world. Some say that Panku's spirit never ceased but turned into humans, which accounts for the ancient Chinese belief that humans are the soul of all matter. Panku sacrificed his life to create the world and his body to enrich and beautify it. Now the skies are graced with luminous celestial bodies. The earth contoured by great mountains and rivers and flora and fauna galore, and Panku, the giant god who came out of an egg, is nowhere, yet everywhere to be found. After Panku emerged from his mythical egg and created the physical universe, the earth separated from the heavens and became a beautiful place, full of lush green vegetation, vast rivers, tall mountains, and all sort of animals. One day, Nuwa decided to go for a walk in the woods among the mountains and animals. As she walked along, she was suddenly overcome with loneliness. Even though everything around her was strikingly beautiful, Nuwa had no one to keep her company. She decided to pause along the banks of a river and began to make figures out of clay from the mud. At first, she began to make easy shapes like chickens and sheep, and though they amused her, she soon became bored with them. Gazing into the river and seeing her reflection, she was struck with inspiration. Why not make clay figures that looked like her? She began to shape the mud into figures with faces, arms, hands, and legs. To her delight, they began to dance and talk with her when she put them on the ground. She decided to name them humans. Nuwa was so excited by her creation that she made clay figures until her hands hurt. She took the end of a rope, dipped it in the mud, and began to swing it around her head, forming blobs of sticky mud around her. It is said that high-born noble people are descendants of those that Nuwa created by hand, while working class people were formed from the rope. The word of the first being very different from ours now, the earth was just in its infancy and was only separated from the sky by four very large pillars. One day, Kong Kong, the god of water and the god of fire, Churong, became locked in a massive battle that would determine the ruler of heaven. Wildlife raged and floods plagued the countryside. Kong Kong was motivated by evil, ultimately lost the fight. Kong Kong was so angered that he bashed his head against Pucho Mountains, one of the four pillars holding up the heavens. The earth began to tremble, and the pillars collapsed and ripped a hole in the sky. At this point, the earth was completely in tatters from Churong and Kong Kong's epic battle. Fires had scorched the earth. Water was pouring incessantly from the hole in the sky, and the heavens no longer covered the earth. Seeing how her children were suffering, Nuwa immediately sprang to action. She went to the sky turtle, and begged him to grant her a miracle to save her children. The turtle obliged and used a sword she had given him to cut off his own 4 legs. Nuwa then gathered 5 colored stones and melted them together to fix the hole in the sky. She used Ou's legs to replace the 4 broken pillars, all the while holding up the sky with her back while rain poured down upon her. The ancient Chinese historian Sima Qian recorded the following account of Nuwa's heroic deed. Although she did her best, Nuwa couldn't get the sky and earth to align exactly the way it had before. The earth became permanently tilted, and that is why it is said that all of the rivers in China run in a southeastern direction. Once upon a time, the youngest daughter of Emperor Yan Ti, legendary ruler of primitive China, went boating on the eastern sea. While she was enjoying herself, a strong wind rose on the sea and her boat capsized. Just before she was buried by the surging waves, she turned into a beautiful bird. The bird looked like a crow but had a colorful head, a white bill, and 2 red claws. She lived on Fa-Chu Hill, where grew a lot of mulberry bushes, and when she flew over the roaring sea, it cried sadly in the sound Chin-wei, Chin-wei. That was why people called it Jingwei. Jingwei hated the sea so much that it decided to fill it up. Every day it flew to and fro from the 2 mountains and sea, carrying a twig or pebble from the mountain and dropping it into the sea. One day the roaring sea said to Jingwei, "Poor little bird, stop doing that. Meaningless thing, you'll never fill me up." Jingwei replied, "I'll fill you up, no doubt. I will, even if it will take me thousands of years. I'll fight on till doomsday." The brave little bird kept carrying twigs and pebbles from the mountains to the eastern sea without taking a rest. From this fable comes the idiom, the bird Chingwei trying to fill the sea. It is so hard for a little bird to fill the sea up in such a way, but it is still commendable for its determination and tenacity. In the eastern sea, there was a huge magic tree named Fu Sang, who was over 10,000 feet tall and spread its leaves out over 2,000 li. On it lived the 10 sons of the heavenly emperor. Every day, one of them turned into a 3-legged crow, which is also the sun, and flew up to the sky, illuminating the earth. But one day, the 10 brothers were involved into a heated argument about who was the best son of their father. To show their individual power, they all flew up to the sky and thus caused the earth to scorch. Having failed to order his sons to stop ruining the earth, the Jade Emperor summoned Hou Yi, the god of archery, to discipline his naughty sons. When Hou Yi landed on the earth, seeing all the dead creatures, he was filled with sadness. He called out to the sons and ordered them to stop their foolishness, but they only leaped around the grand archer, mocking his seriousness. Hou Yi was angry and threatened to shoot them down, but the sons laughed even harder, as they thought that Hou Yi, a heavenly court servant, could do nothing to them. At first, being afraid of the possible punishment for killing the sons of Heavenly Emperor, Hou Yi hesitated, but soon he made up his mind to rescue the earth, grabbing one magic arrow out of his quiver and aimed carefully. The arrow flew straight into the heart of the most boastful son. Quickly, the sun dropped down from the sky, burning up in a ball of fire. The earth immediately felt cooler. Then the grand archer stalked the remaining sons. Hou Yi kept shooting until there was only one sun left in the sky. Hou Yi warned the last son to be obedient or dutiful and then went back to the heavenly kingdom. From then on, the last sun flew across the sky in solitude every day, bringing light and warmth to the earth for all eternity. The heavenly emperor was very angry and forbade Hou Yi to go back to heaven. Hou Yi became a normal person and people loved him. He became the king and ruled the land he had saved. The legend of Chang. Chang was a beautiful young girl working in the Jade Emperor's palace in heaven, where immortals, good people, and fairies lived. One day she accidentally broke a precious porcelain jar. Angered, the Jade Emperor banished her to live on earth, where ordinary people lived. She could return to heaven if she contributed a valuable service on earth. Chang was transformed into a member of poor farming family. When she was 18, a young hunter named Hou Yi from another village spotted her. Now a beautiful young woman, they become friends. One day, a strange phenomenon occurred. 10 suns arose in the sky instead of one, blazing the earth. Hou Yi, an expert archer, stepped forward to try to save the earth. He successfully shot down 9 of the suns, becoming an instant hero. He eventually became king and married Chang. But Hou Yi grew to become a despot. He sought immortality by ordering an elixir be created to prolong his life. The elixir in the form of a single pill was almost ready when Chang came upon it. She either accidentally or purposely swallowed the pill. This angered King Hou Yi, who went after his wife. Trying to flee, she jumped out the window of a chamber at the top of palace. And instead of falling, she floated into the sky towards the moon. King Hou Yi tried to shoot her down with arrows, but without success. Once on the moon, Chang became a three-legged toad as punishment from the Queen Mother. According to another version of this legend, her companion, a rabbit, is constantly pounding the elixir of immortality in a large mortar. The moon is also inhabited by a woodcutter who tries to cut down the Seisia tree, giver of life. But as fast as he cuts into the tree, it heals itself, and he never makes any progress. The Chinese use this image of the Seisia tree to explain mortal life on earth. The limbs are constantly being cut away by death, but new buds continually appear. Meanwhile, King Hou Yi ascended to the sun and built a palace. So Chang and Hou Yi come to represent the yin and yang, the moon and the sun. Yu the Great harnesses the flood and the first dynasty is founded. Yu the Great was the chieftain of legendary Xiahou clan. He was originally called Yu or Xia Yu. According to legend, the Yellow River flooded during the reign of Emperor Yao, and the people were forced to abandon their villages and go to live in trees or on mountain tops. The flood brought great misery to the people. Emperor Yao, the chieftain of Yanhuang tribal alliance, appointed Kun to harness the flood. Kun built dikes to keep back the water but failed. Shun, who succeeded Yao, killed Kun and appointed Kun's son Yu to continue with the flood harnessing work. Yu adopted the dredging method to lead the flood waters to flow along river courses into the sea. Yu worked very hard. It was said that during the 13 years he spent taming the flood, he passed his home 3 times but did not enter until his task was completed. As a result of his successful efforts, the people bestowed on him the title Yu the Great, and Shun chose Yu as his successor. With the approval of tribal chieftains, Following the taming of the floods, vegetation and wild beasts grew rampant, threatening the survival of the people. Yu taught his subjects the art of agriculture and thus how to dominate the land and feed themselves into regular and organized way. He also repelled invasions by Miao tribe and consolidated the Hua Xia people's supremacy in the Central Plains. Around 2070 BCE, Yu established the Xia dynasty, the first dynasty in Chinese history. After Yu's death, his son Qi succeeded to the throne. Crushing an attempt to overthrow him by the Youhu clan, Qi established the system of hereditary rulers. The Xia dynasty lasted over 400 years. Its last king, Jie, vilified in the ancient records as a tyrant, was overthrown by the leader of the kingdom of Chang on the lower reaches of Yellow River in 1600 BCE.